This is Warren Vanderhill interviewing Professor Andrew Seager, Muncie Jewish Oral History Project 2, January 2nd, 2002. 2003. We'll get this right on the transcript. Andy, I want to thank you for your agreeing to do this. As you know, I've done about a half dozen of these so far. It's been a really interesting project, and I know that you'll add a very important dimension to it. Let me begin with a question that doesn't pertain specifically to the Muncie Jewish community, and that is to ask you why you came to Muncie, Indiana, and if at that point in your life there might have been some other options.
I came because of the College of Architecture and Planning, which had just gotten started a couple of years earlier, and that was an exciting opportunity, I think, to get in on something not quite at the beginning, but it's still at a time when you could feel like you were part of something that was being made. And although I'm not sure how word had gotten around at that time, the people that I was able to ask about I'd never heard of Ball State.
Okay, fair enough. I think it's probably true of a lot of people who come from the New York area.
So I tried. People I was able to ask said, well, they hear good things about Ball State and about that college. So that's it looked good to me from that point of view. I had some other options. It sounds very strange now. One was Oklahoma, and the other one was Notre Dame.
Okay.
And what sounds strange from the point of view of now is at Notre Dame they took me to the faculty club and spent a lot of time showing me that it was right on the golf course and what a great opportunity this faculty club was. And at Ball State they took me to La Follette for lunch at the cafeteria there. And at that point in my life, somehow or other I appreciated the straightforwardness of the way I was treated at Muncie. And I wasn't, at that point in my life, I wasn't ready to be sold on the golf course in the country club. It didn't seem to me to be a good reason to choose to go somewhere.
Well, I think it's probably fair to say that both of us in our long careers here wish that we would have been able to have a faculty club at some point. I think it would have added a really nice dimension.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. When you talk about other options, I'm just adding in another dimension that interests me at this point in our conversation. Was it important to be a pioneer, to come into this college and be one of the first faculty?
It was important, I think, more so in retrospect. I don't know that I quite saw myself as a pioneer. Something close to that. Even in the third year, the curriculum had already been established, so I wasn't creating the curriculum at that point, but I was helping to implement it, to develop it. So I guess there's a certain sense of pioneering. I didn't feel like I was on the frontier exactly, but sort of in the youth.
Being in Muncie might have seemed like the frontier after New York.
No, I came from Ames, Iowa.
Oh, okay. I thought you were in grad school. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So, in some ways, Muncie was bigger than Ames.
Yeah.
And Muncie was, the Iowa State community was not very different from the Ball State community, I don't think. But Ames was more provincial than, Ames outside of Iowa, the Iowa State community, was more provincial than Muncie outside the Ball State community.
Okay. Well, since you started on that, let me pick up on the Muncie part of this question, and that is, okay, you grew up in New York City, and you've been at Iowa State in Ames, Iowa. Now you come to Muncie, Indiana. This is several decades ago. What did you think of Muncie when you came here?
I didn't come directly from New York. I've been in Ithaca for several years, and then from there. If I'd come directly from New York, I probably would have had a different reaction.
Right.
Well, for a long time, my reaction was that I didn't have the time to miss the things that weren't available. I think everybody who comes from the East Coast or a big city notices the things that you can't do. But sort of philosophically, maybe it's being a bit of a Pollyanna, reminding myself that my brother who lived in New York didn't have the time and sometimes not the money to do the things that were available to him. So when we would go to New York for a holiday, we would go to a play or go to a museum, and my brother hadn't done those things during the course of the year. So that helped me, I suppose, not miss being in New York. The strange things to me were certain things were very strange. One of them was dinner hour was sort of like 4:30 to 6, and after 6 you couldn't get anything to eat.
Right.
And I missed being able to get what I consider to be bread.
Right.
All you could get here was that white stuff.
That's a constant theme, I think, with people who come from the East Coast. I remember talking to your colleague, Paul Lasso, about that. He said that what you needed to have in Muncie was somebody who could bake bread that would challenge your gums. I've always thought about that. Well, now that you've been here for quite a while, I've been very involved in a lot of town gown scenarios. What do you think of Muncie, lo these many years later?
Well, on that side of things that are available, that's changed drastically. All the fast food places, that's actually changed 2 times. In the food department, there was a time when you couldn't get anything other than fast food. All the local mom and pop places had closed. But that's come around again. So you've had the Thai place and other places that aren't chains. The supermarkets have many kinds of products they didn't have before. So I don't have that sense of being without things that I would like to have. I can get things I grew up with in New York without much problem. On the other side, I'm more aware politically of how strange a place Muncie is in terms of politics. I don't think I was aware of that when I first came here for a long time. But.
Well, you've been pretty vocal about some of the views that you have, especially living where you do in the Muncie community, as to things that ought to be done differently than certainly the way that people like us see them. So, I mean, you've been outspoken as far as neighborhoods and things like that. I mean, I'm not so sure that it'd be an awful lot different if you were in New York. I mean, you might be as outspoken there too, but here I guess it sort of slaps you in the face a little bit more.
There's probably more opportunity to be outspoken.
Right, that's true.
You know, in Ames, I went to a city council meeting once and spoke about something. I don't remember what it was, but they thanked me for coming. I was the only. I was nervous because it was the first time I'd been to a council meeting. They thanked me for coming because they didn't get anybody showing up. So that. And in Muncie, of course, people do show up at meetings, and it's as remote as official decision-making can seem sometimes. It's probably a lot less remote in Muncie than it is in New York. I don't know what it would be like to go to a city council meeting in New York. We probably don't get to say very much.
No, that's true, unlike here. Let me ask you some questions about your life as a member of a Jewish community before you came to Muncie. So think of any Jewish community that you might have been part of growing up in New York, Ithaca, Ames, etc. And talk a little bit about that. I mean, before you came to Muncie and became involved with Temple Bethel, what was your life like as a member of Jewish communities, either singular or plural?
During the time that I was in college, I wasn't very much part of the Jewish community at all.
Okay. How about growing up in New York?
Growing up, well, New York, as you know, is still very ethnic in the pockets. So we lived in a neighborhood that was kind of Jewish, Irish, Italian, and in different kinds of pockets. And I think ethnic identity is something that people are very conscious of. So I went to the Tremont Temple in New York, and I was bar mitzvahed at Tremont Temple. And that was, I guess I didn't realize at the time that thinking back on that, my parents weren't very religious, so I'm not really sure why that was important to them.
Tremont Temple, a fairly large congregation?
It was at the time. Yeah, it's now a Baptist church.
Right.
But that's the way things go in New York. Yeah, it was a pretty large congregation, Reformed congregation, very Reformed congregation. Had a choir and choir robes.
Okay.
And I learned the kinds of things about a bit of Hebrew, a bit of Jewish history and culture. Of course, you're growing up in a culture that's a kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I don't think you can really quite describe it as Jewish culture so much as, I don't know, what a New York, Eastern European-derived Yiddish culture. My grandparents spoke Yiddish. My mother spoke Yiddish. But we never learned Yiddish. I'm sure you've heard many times Yiddish was spoken in the household, and they didn't want us to know what they were saying.
Yeah, it's like Dutch in my household.
Yeah. So I can remember one conversation. I don't know how old I was, but it was mostly in Yiddish. But I caught the word hysterectomy somewhere in between in the Yiddish.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then you went off to college.
But then I went off to college, and when I went to Cornell, which is also has a substantial Jewish population. I don't know what percentage. Yeah. So you're in a culture that's largely of New York.
Right.
Good part of it is New York City Jewish origins, but I wasn't part of any Jewish organization. Wasn't religiously active at the time. And when I went to Ames, and of course that has a very tiny Jewish population, at least among the student body. And the grad students, we had a little a group that we called the Ocean Club. It was anyone who'd seen an ocean or a large lake. So for lack of membership of people.
Lake Coyote count?
or the Great Lakes count.
Yeah. Okay.
But that was more an observation than anything else, and it wasn't especially Jewish. It was probably included most of the Jewish grad students, but it wasn't only that. It was people who come from one coast to the other, usually North Chicago, from bigger cities, and I think it was more had to do with disciplines than anything. It wasn't an intentional, wasn't an exclusive thing. It was just an observation about who happened to be getting together. But it was for some reason. I mean, we didn't have much to do with the agricultural or horticultural parts of the campus. But it wasn't especially Jewish. There was a Hillel at Iowa State. I wondered how a land grant institution ended up with a Hillel. But we didn't. I wasn't connected with it. Didn't have anything to do with it.
Then you came here. And did you affiliate with Temple Beth El when you came here?
No, it was several years. It was actually at Marv Rosenman's instigation, actually. He had painting the wall of the basement.
Oh, for the school.
For the school.
Yeah. Alba mentioned that during your interview. Yeah.
And somehow or other he got me involved in that.
Okay. So that really leads to my next question, and that is, what has your life been like as a member of this Jewish community? I guess what I'm really asking is how important is it to you?
It's not central to my life as I know it is to some other people. I'm not often there for Shabbos services, and that it's not important to me to. We don't honor Shabbat the way we're supposed to honor Shabbat. So that's not. It's not a central part of my life. I don't really know how to answer that.
Okay,
question.
no, that's fair enough.
I'm very happy that it's here, and I probably would be very unhappy if it weren't here. But it's not really essential.
Okay. And in the
there's a certain
rootedness
to it.
Go ahead. Why don't you say that again?
Well, there's a certain rootedness that it gives to my life that I probably wouldn't have otherwise.
Okay. In the first study that Dwight Hoover and I did of the Muncie Jewish community, we asked all the participants to comment on relationships in the community between Jewish and non-Jewish members of the larger Muncie community, which was a really big issue in the generation that I've come to call, for the purposes of this study, the Marty Schwartz generation. Do you think that is still a major issue in the larger Muncie community, relationships between Jewish and non-Jewish people, or in the 23-year period since I did the first interviews, has that largely gone by the boards?
Well, from my perspective, it's not a major issue anymore. It's gone by the boards. It's possibly an issue the other way around. That is to say, there's recently a movement because of the declining Jewish population in America, the number of Jews who are intermarrying and the children aren't being brought up Jewish. Yeah. There's I think a certain movement generally to be among Jews, especially among Reform Jews, I think to want to be more Jewish, to establish an identity, to be to avoid certain kinds of assimilationist ways of thinking. So in that sense, it might be an issue from
the other side.
the other side.
Well, do you notice that in Temple Bethel?
There was a time a few years ago, yes, 5, 10 years ago,
Right.
But not currently, no.
Okay. Do you think that the issue of relationships between Jewish and non-Jewish members of the Muncie community is worth talking about, if you will, with participants of your generation that are part of this study?
Sure. Sure, I think since it was an important question before, I think it's a good question to ask to find out.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm a bit hesitant about that is that having now done a half dozen of these, it doesn't seem like it's that much of an issue anymore. I mean, you're sort of coming in here as not the first person I've spoken with, but more like the 6th or 7th, and I'm getting the same kind of response from everybody that it really isn't that much of an issue. And I guess, let me take it one step beyond. I mean, since you've been in Muncie, have you experienced any examples of either overt or covert anti-Semitism?
Not directly myself. There was, I mean, only about a year ago, I think, there was I didn't actually see it, but showed up at the temple to find that they had overnight erased some graffiti that had shown up on the wall. I never heard what the graffiti was.
Yeah, it was a swastika, that had been desecrated. And people have said that they really didn't make a big issue of it and figured it was an isolated incident.
There's that. What I'm very sensitive about is something that's not particularly anti-Jewish, but it's remarks like that. It has to do. I'm thinking about letters to the editor and forums like that, in which it's described as a Christian country.
Oh yeah.
And ways in which non-Christians tend to, or sometimes the ideas that I see in letters to the editor that ethics derives from Christianity, without people realizing that that's labeling non-Christians as inherently unethical.
Yeah, right. Well put.
So that, I think, is still there and very much a concern. It comes up with, and it doesn't usually come up in connection with Judaism at all. It comes up with things like the ACLU and putting the 10 Commandments on the lawn and why that ought to happen. And the answer is, well, that's because our ethics are based on Christianity.
Make sure it's in front of the courthouse.
Yeah. So there's actually great offense, I think, to non-Christians in that attitude.
Yeah, I think you're right. How do you view the future of Temple Bethel? How do you see it?
Well, it's the only game in town for Jews. So I think it's going to be here, be around for a long time. You had mentioned to me the other day that people commenting about being concerned about the financial future.
Yeah,
I don't think I would have thought to say that, though I think it's true.
Okay.
I don't know why I wouldn't have thought to say that. I imagine that the finances of the temple have been precarious for several decades.
Yeah, that's true.
And but somehow or other, I think that will, as long as it's important to people, they'll find a way to make it keep going.
Well, it comes up in the context of another question that I think I might as well move to, and that is what I've said to each of the persons who has participated in the interviews. If you had a wish list, and you had 2, 3, 4 wishes for the temple's future, what would you put on your wish list? And that's usually the context in which people talk about that. Would you put that on your wish list? That would be high on your list of maybe, excuse me, finding some endowments that might ensure the financial future and not have it as precarious as it is now.
It's not a question I thought much about, but just on the spur of the moment, it probably would be the highest on the list.
Okay.
I can't think of offhand of anything that would be more important than that.
Well, it leads to another question. I know we touched on this briefly the other day when we were chatting about this a bit. 23 years ago when I did these interviews, the matter of having a full-time rabbi was a really burning issue with the generation of Marty Schwartz. I find now that this is still a very, very big issue with people, that they feel that would be important as far as this sort of hypothetical wish list that I'm talking about. I mean, where would that be on the Andy Seager wish list? For
me personally, it's not an important issue.
Okay. So So it would not be numero uno on your list, that we should do all that we can as members of this congregation to find dollars to have a full-time rabbi.
Well, I want to be a little careful about answering. As I said before, I'm not often there on Shabbat services, and but I recognize that that's really the core purpose of the synagogue existing. So I would really would like to answer that question, not in terms of myself, but in terms of what was important to the people for whom that's important.
Yeah.
So I don't really, although it's not important to me, I wouldn't really want to say, no, it's not important.
Okay.
I think that for the people for whom the daily observation of Judaism is more important, I think their views on that are more important than mine. Okay.
And their views, obviously, as you're well aware, are that they should do all they can to have a full-time rabbi, although this discussion has been going on for, I don't know, as far as I know, at least 3 decades. And now there are people who would like to see if they could develop some plans that would involve perhaps some kind of dual appointment with the university and religious studies and areas such as that in the academic program of Ball State. How important do you think it is to the future of the temple to have this lovely building addition that they have now?
I think it has been very important.
Okay, well, talk a little bit about why it's important.
I don't know why exactly, except that it seems to have uplifted the spirits of the congregation enormously and increased the level of participation, people's comfort level in joining in. I don't know whether it's having the facilities themselves, which are really very nice and much admired, or whether it's just the idea of having done it, someone made the investment. Probably both of those together. Yeah. But it seems to me that it has made me much more optimistic about the future of the temple. There's been altogether major difference.
The working hypothesis that I have for this study is something like this. If it were not for Ball State University and Wall Memorial Hospital and the people who have come here, who are part of the Jewish community, drawn by employment opportunities, professional opportunities at those the two largest employers in Muncie, there might not be a temple. How do you respond to that? If you pull those people out of here, do you think that there would be much of a congregation left? Would there be much there any longer?
Well, it'd certainly be much smaller. I don't know whether they'll be large enough to survive. There are Jewish communities in Kokomo and Marion that have synagogues, and they probably have community hospitals. And Kokomo would have has a campus there. But,
right.
So I suspect there would probably be some kind of facility, but it would be much smaller. Okay. It's just a very small congregation as it is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't know what proportion. I know that Ball State and hospital people comprise a good percentage of that population.
Yeah, I guess that's what really struck me when I embarked upon this project, that as I went through the temple directory, even though I know almost all the people who, well, certainly the Ball State people and a fair number of those who are part of the medical community, I was really taken back when I just started counting, because it's a really large number. The other point I would make, since you're an example of this and so am I, that what Ball State and the hospital have done is really to bring people here who are in most cases certainly not Hoosiers, and in a large number of cases they're not Midwesterners. I mean, it's to me an example of bringing people who certainly have very, very different perspectives on almost everything than you would find with the people who grew up in Muncie. Well, go ahead.
I was just laughing. Almost everything.
Yeah, I mean, so you've got people who are from the West Coast or from the East Coast, or if they're from this part of the country, they spend some time in large cities. And I think that brings a very important kind of diversity to the Temple Bethel congregation that you don't find in a lot of other congregations around here.
Curiously, though, there seems also to be recently an increase. Well, 2 people is not a good statistical base, I guess, but there are at least a few congregation members in recent years who came for business purposes, not because of Ball State or Ball Memorial. Think of Larry Francie and Tom Steiner,
right,
or perhaps others as well.
Well, I've not talked to Larry yet, and you know more about him than I do. I mean, I certainly know of his enviable reputation in the congregation. But Tom Steiner fits my other model, and that is he came here from Chicago, although he spent some time in Marion, and then went to Chicago, but really grew up in Chicago, or suburban Chicago, I guess, but worked in downtown Chicago before he decided to open his business here. But I think you're right. I think it represents some people drawn here by professional opportunities that do not have to do with the hospital or the university. The only way they bear on that, if I can take this one step further, is that Tom Steiner wouldn't have come here to open the Blue Bottle if it had not been for the population of students and faculty at Ball State. I mean, I asked him that question. I said, you know, what brought you here? And his response was, well, this wasn't really my first choice. But when I thought of the population and the location in the village, and the potential of people like us going there for a coffee and some conversation, whatever, that certainly made it a viable business opportunity. Is there anything else you'd like to add? This is your chance for free-ranging conversation and commentary.
When you mentioned that the idea about a full-time rabbi, I thought it was a very exciting idea, and to try to do that in some way in connection with Ball State makes. My first reaction was wonderful. I mean, otherwise I couldn't see how it could come about. I did since then start wondering how you would work out. I think it would be very important to work out who makes the decision. How do you make the decision about who this person would be if it were to come to pass? I started wondering if Ball State's criteria for a member of the religious studies faculty would be the same as the criteria for an active rabbi in the congregation, and wondering what would how one would work it out so that what would happen if the congregation didn't like the rabbi.
Well, I'm not saying that this is without logistical difficulty. I think it is. I think right now. This was a proposal that a few people put together, and as I understand it, they presented it to Dean Ron Johnstone shortly before he retired. He, of course, is now retired, and I think that the intention now is to try to bring it back to the attention of the current dean and perhaps the provost and the president, and see if they can get something going on this. I mean, the only reason it's a big issue to me, as an outsider, is that I was really struck by how passionate people have been about this issue of having, as I phrase it, a spiritual leader 24/7 for Temple Bethel, when the same conversations took place 23 years ago with almost everybody that I spoke with. When you say to them, what do you think the most important issues are for Temple Bethel in the late 1970s, you wouldn't go too far into the conversation before somebody would say, you know, if we could only figure out a way to have a full-time rabbi. So it's a big issue. But I mean, you've touched on the main part of this that's really the key, and that is that you've got to have some endowment dollars that the university has discovered with a lot of its programs since it began doing serious fundraising in the late 80s, early 90s with the Wings for the Future campaign. I mean, we both know that endowment dollars are the dollars. And you've got to have money that's someplace earning a fair amount of interest to support things like a dual appointment between Temple Bethel and Ball State University. And at some point, somebody's going to say that. You know, how do you plan to do this? The other element of this, just for the purpose of our friendship and our conversation, is that we're talking about this walking into the office. People are talking about, well, maybe we get Lilly involved, since Lilly puts a tremendous amount of money into religious studies. I mean, it's the one area of the Lilly endowment where they can go outside of Indiana. I mean, the majority of their money is for Indiana institutions, but in the area of religious studies, they have funded projects, really important projects, all over the United States. So I think that's what people are thinking about. Maybe there's a combination of Temple Bethel dollars, Ball State University dollars, and Lilly dollars that could pull this off. And I think, if they're going to do it, that's probably the way to do it.
It's a very exciting idea.
Yeah.
I assume, I don't know if there are models. I know there are at least some models for the joint appointment of the ROTC.
Yep.
Is one that comes to mind. But
Yeah.
so there may be model. I would think that it'd be pretty important to work out those questions.
You touched on a key issue. You know, speaking here as the son of a Dutch Reformed pastor, that what happens if this person is a tenured, let's say, associate professor, and the people in the congregation decide that he or she is a real loser. they don't want to continue with the person serving his or her spiritual role.
Well, I'm aware. I haven't. Temple Bethel hasn't faced really the question of retaining a rabbi or not for a long time, not since I've been there. But I know other congregations have. It's always very difficult if half the congregation is unhappy with the
well, especially the congregation that size, because both of us know what happens is that half the people leave, and do something else. Which brings up one last question I just thought of. Has there been in the time that you've been part of the Temple Bethel congregation any major concern over the reformed nature of the congregation rather, let's say, than Orthodox or conservative? I mean, you think of Indianapolis where you have congregations that give people a lot of choice. Of course, you'd expect that given the size of Indianapolis. So there you could affiliate with an Orthodox congregation, conservative, reform. And here you have a congregation that began as reform. And I was just wondering if in the time you've been there, since you've been a member for quite a while, if there have been any concerns expressed about that.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Not so far as I know, wanting to nominally change from a Reformed congregation to a conservative congregation. But I think from some members who probably came from conservative or possibly even Orthodox backgrounds, coupled with a movement that's even reached the Union of American Hebrew Congregations to put more religion into Reform Judaism, to be less reformed. The nature of the services have changed here over a period of time. There's to some older members of the congregation that's not very good. They're much more Hebrew than there used to be. Much more music than there used to be. So some people think that's great, some people don't. But I know at least a couple of members of the congregation who complain about the amount of Hebrew in the service. And about somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago, the Constitution was changed. It's been changed back. The wording regarding non-Jewish, the role of non-Jewish spouses in the congregation was changed.
Which is a fairly large number of people in this congregation.
And that was upsetting to me since Sharon is my wife. Sharon is not Jewish. And as you know, other people, Beulah Lazar came to mind as someone who was really very central to the congregation. And I don't remember the wording exactly, but it was something to the effect that of course, that non-Jewish spouses were welcome as members of the congregation, but could not serve on the board, the directory, board of directors, or I think it was heads of committees. And Beulah was I don't remember the title exactly. I think she published the bulletin, so she was probably chair of the publications committee or something like that. Yeah. I'm not sure I've got the title right. Yeah. But that meant for a time that she couldn't hold that office. I never heard anything from Beulah, but I was at the congregation meeting at which that happened, and I was vehemently opposed to that. And that I think that the prime movers of that have left Muncie. And the
that's changed now.
So that's changed backwards, but it certainly was an issue for a while. It was for me.
Well, as I understand it, now you have people who we both know would fit in the category of non-Jewish spouses who play a leadership role in the congregation. Yeah. Which I think is important. I mean, it's very ecumenical, but I could see how some people might not like that if they're more traditional.
And I was never quite clear about the motivation originally. I remember being surprised when someone after that congregational meeting in which that motion to change the Constitution was made and passed at that meeting, someone showed me some literature from UAHC, along those lines and I think the notion was to try to make families make a greater commitment to Judaism. I think the notion that I don't know where this stands now officially was that it was too easy for people to choose not to ignore the question of how the children were brought up or what faith the children were brought up. And this I think it was part of an idea to make people be more conscious of the religious choices they're making and hopefully choose Judaism.
Yeah.
But I wasn't on that side of the question.
Anything else you want to add?
No.
Well, thank you very, very much. I really have appreciated you coming out on this snowy day and helping me with this project. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.